answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
I woke up this morning, got myself a gun. Mama always said I'd be the chosen one.
Beijing is now considering official trade talks with the United States, but it is requesting Washington cancel the unilateral tariff measures first. These tariffs have already taken a toll on Chinese goods. April manufacturing activity in China seeing its sharpest downturn in more than a year. And now the CCP is quietly exempting about a quarter of U.S. imports from tariffs, giving a little olive branch to the U.S. I spoke with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about it all yesterday. He said China's economy is in big trouble if they do not negotiate with the U.S. Watch.
I think first there will need to be a de-escalation on these very large tariffs. 145 and 125 are not sustainable on the Chinese side. We saw some very poor GDP numbers out of them, out of China yesterday. We're now seeing very large estimates of job growth loss from 5 to 10 million jobs.
5 to 10 million jobs lost in China. 5 to 10 million. I'll say it one more time. 5 to 10 million jobs lost in China since Trump said we're going to start hitting you with tariffs. Chinese factories closing up, sending people home, putting them on reduced part-time work, if work at all. And those who said this will not bother China. And what happened with our jobs report that just came out? We added 177,000 jobs in April. This is all good news. You're not going to hear it on the legacy media. You're not going to hear from the naysayers. You're going to hear from Larry Connors USA and NewsTalkSTL and other such outlets. Welcome aboard. Hour number one, Larry Connors USA, reminding you we're here Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. And when we're on the air, we are streaming video. It's pretty fascinating to watch. How do you do that? You go to NewsTalkSTL Rumble, Facebook, Twitter, Larry Connors USA, Rumble, or Facebook. And everything goes up as a podcast later at LarryConnorsUSA.com, NewsTalkSTL, and Larry Connors USA Facebook. Reminding you, Mother's Day is coming up, and we're having a great series of gifts available from numerous sponsors that you might win for your mother. Still looking for a gift? Well, why don't you go first to NewsTalkSTL and enter free that you want to win one of these gifts. We'll hold a drawing, and we'll notify the winners in time for them to get them. I'll point out to you a couple things here. Yesterday, we had some great fruit delivered here from Anthony's Produce, one of the sponsors of a giveaway for Mother's Day. And Harry J's Steakhouse had done it last week, bringing some items by for us to sample. And Mario's Donuts. I mean, I think we're all picking up weight around here, but we're doing great with all our sponsors. Again, keep Mother in mind. Step forward, go to NewsTalkSTL, and register to win. Now, let's talk about some trade stats before we continue, reference China. First of all, Trump signed an executive order that ends the minimum exemption for goods imported from China and Hong Kong as of May 2nd. What is today? May 2nd, 2025. Yeah, I remind you, with Larry Connors USA, you're going to get news, you're going to get analysis, you're going to get opinion, and you're going to get education. You're going to leave each hour with more knowledge than you had when we began. I make a point to deliver that education. This minimum exemption was allowing goods valued at $800 or less to enter the U.S. without being subject to duties and taxes. Trump signed an executive order to end it as of May 2nd. Since 2016, shippers from China and elsewhere have imported billions of small packages to the U.S. under that exemption. So now, starting on May 2nd, today, The U.S. will begin collecting a duty of either 30% of the value of the packages at $800 or less shipped through the International Postal Network, or $25 per item. And on June 1, that rate's going to increase to $50 per package. Macau, like Hong Kong, is considered by China to be a special administrative region. They're probably going to be added to that list of the summer as well. Trade analysts speaking with Epoch Times said the closure of this exemption to China and Hong Kong will be a significant blow to online retailers who sell goods through websites such as Amazon, but it's especially detrimental to those made in China retail and fashion giants Shein and Temu. So you're going to see increases there. So is the U.S. still winning this war? Well, there's more to it than just trade. But before I break down and show you what else is available, this is important to keep in mind. Let me give you an example of exactly what we're doing with China on importing goods and merchandise 2024. Cell phones, household goods, we spend with China $64 billion. $64 billion. Computers, $34 billion. Toys, games, sporting goods, $30 billion. Electrical apparatus, $27 billion. Apparel, textiles, household or cotton, $20 billion. Computer accessories, $16 billion. Parts and accessories of vehicles, $15 billion. Household appliances, $14 billion. Telecommunications equipment of all types, $13 billion. Furniture and household goods, $12 billion. Those are the numbers that we're talking about that we've been spending with China and paying an exorbitant rate with the tariffs they had on us until Trump said, we're going to level the playing field. We're going to hit you with a 125% tariff. They fired back, we'll hit you with 150%. But China has blinked, as you were hearing in that report from Maria. They now are looking for a way, how do we sit down and work this out? Kevin O'Leary said it is, again, more than just a trade issue.
There's a pattern, though, Maria, that with China you should be aware of, particularly innovation in America. When a product or service is actually created here and people spend hundreds of millions in R&D, when it hits a $5 million run rate, it gets knocked off. I testified this a few weeks ago. I used an example of a very simple product called DrainWig, which is an innovation in America to help hotel owners reduce plumbing costs by catching hair in drains. It's so simple, but it's a patented product.
Right.
40 knockoffs. 40 knockoffs.
Right.
Put the company out of business.
Put the company out of business with all the knockoffs. They don't pay attention to our patent laws and rules. So that's another issue, not just the trade. Then, of course, we look at what Iran has been sucking up from us with the Biden administration and how they continue to fund their terrorists. Senator Ted Cruz.
In the first Trump term, I was deeply involved in the fight to impose maximum pressure on Iran. And President Trump, the most important national security decision he made his first term was pulling out of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. I probably spent 24 meetings with him in the Oval Office making the case for that. He agreed with me. He did that. But the follow-up to that, after we pulled out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal, there remained in place an oil waiver where Iran was allowed to sell oil, and they were selling roughly 1 million barrels a day of oil. At that point, you'll remember there was a fight within the Trump administration between the State Department and the Energy Department. The State Department said that if we ended the oil waiver, it would cause the global price of oil to skyrocket and the price of gasoline here at home to skyrocket. The Department of Energy, which you might think would know something about energy, said that's nonsense. There's plenty of global supply of oil. We can end the waiver without materially impacting the price of oil. I weighed in again aggressively and said end the oil waiver. The president agreed with me, and we now know that energy was right and state was wrong. Iran's oil sales fell from 1 million barrels a day down to 300,000 barrels a day. And the price of oil didn't move at all. Right. It had essentially no impact on the global price of oil.
And yet Iran is reduced to 300,000 barrels of oil, which means less revenue. Again, Senator Cruz.
Iran's oil sales fell from 1 million barrels a day down to 300,000 barrels a day. And the price of oil didn't move at all. It had essentially no impact on the global price of oil. When Joe Biden came into office, he inherited an Iranian regime. The economy was in free fall. The regime was teetering. And when he came into office, they were selling 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Biden immediately stopped enforcing the oil sanctions, and the Iranian oil sales skyrocketed from 300,000 barrels a day to about 2 million barrels a day. And as you rightly noted, in a very real sense, the Biden administration, by refusing to enforce sanctions, flowed $100 billion to the Ayatollah and in a very direct way funded October 7th and Hamas and Hezbollah by providing the principal source of revenue to the regime. So President Trump is exactly right, going back and saying we're going back to maximum pressure. We're going to cut off the money and we're going to cut off the funds that are funding the terrorists.
Absolutely correct. Thank you, Joe Biden, for endangering our nation and the world, for letting Iran collect all the money it did during your term. In our next hour, I want you to hear how our Navy protected the carrier Harry S. Truman from Houthi rebel drones, of course, paid and bought for by Iran, based in Houthi, Yemen territory. It's a fascinating story. That'll be coming up later. In the meantime, White House advisor Steve Miller does not suffer fools. And he went on a rampage against leftist media who are often pushing propaganda, not news.
Most of your papers never covered her story when it happened. To the extent that you covered it at all, it was because President Trump forced you to cover it by highlighting it repeatedly over and over again. He had to shame you into covering it. And each and every one of you that sides over and over again with these MS-13 terrorists, to the extent that you have the financial means to do so, you all choose to live in condos or homes or houses as far away from these kinds of gangbangers as you possibly can. If I offered any one of you a rent-free home with no taxes to pay in any of these gang neighborhoods, and I said your neighbors are MS-13 terrorists or Mexican mafia or Sinaloa cartel or Tren de Aragua, I couldn't pay you to live there. But yet you, with your coverage, are trying to force innocent Americans to have these people as their neighbors, and that one day their daughter may be abducted from their home and raped and murdered. So you're not going to get an ounce of sympathy from this administration or President Trump for the terrorists who've invaded our homes and our country.
And that was directed to those media who were ignoring all the crimes against Americans. And then the Maryland resident they like to talk about being sent down to El Salvador to the prison. This guy had already been stopped. He had been deported twice, by the way. He got stopped shortly before this last arrest and picked up. He was in a car that had extra seats. He was transporting humans. He was human trafficking. Said he came through St. Louis on his way to Tennessee and who knows where else. The nation's beginning to recognize this, and it has nothing to do, if you're honest, with your politics, the color of your skin, your religion. You want a safe environment for you and your kids. CNN's Van Jones decided he would go out and do a survey focusing on basically why so many black voters supported Trump this last time when they did not do it previously. Let's begin.
Usually when you think about a Trump voter, you think about a white male with a red hat on, but there were millions of black voters who picked Donald Trump this time. So I came here to talk to 3 of them, and I was surprised by what I found. You weren't always a Republican.
No. Actually, I come from a family that was like super Democratic. My first time voting, I voted Democrat. I voted for Joe Biden.
What about Trump appealed to you?
Am I allowed to cuss?
Yeah, you can.
I mean, part of it is he's an asshole. I like authenticity.
You voted for Obama in Then you voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. But 2020, you voted for Donald Trump. What made the change?
I began listening to someone. Her name is Candace Owens. And I read her book. And it just opened my eyes to maybe he's not this person that I have been led to believe that he was.
In other words, she started thinking for herself. And they certainly are capable of it. But many just want to be like sheep and follow whatever the loudest noise is. Trump is bad, orange hair man, crazy. And then they back off and start looking at it and making their own evaluations. And as the one in the interview said, when Van Jones asked, why do you want Trump? He said, can I say it? Because he knew he was talking to a CNN anchor. Am I going to be allowed to say what I think? And he said, I like Trump because he is an a-hole, but I like his authenticity. The interview continues.
So you voted against Trump in 2016.
Yes.
But then in 2020, you voted for him?
Absolutely.
Why?
I saw how things were going during his first term, and I was pleasantly surprised, and I was pleased with what was happening. I saw the economy getting better. I saw country relations in certain countries getting better.
You know, people, when they think about a Trump voter, they usually think about like a white dude with like a red hat on and a pickup truck, and y'all are not that at all. So Donald Trump's team went in, they took down Harriet Tubman's picture for a quick minute. They're trying to like knock out the black museums. What does that have to do with the price of eggs, and how does that impact you?
In some ways, it's a slap in the face. In other ways, I don't care. I care more about how I'm going to take care of my children.
I don't think the average American cares about that. I know I am sick and tired of seeing black people sit there and complain about something, but not taking action and steps to actually try to change things in an appropriate manner.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. You're thinking and you're making your own decisions. You're not being one of the sheep. Van Jones made that reference to some of the allegations that Trump is trying to destroy historically black university colleges. He's not. He's actually making sure they get the funding they need without going through extra jumps and hurdles to get the money. And again, we added 177,000 jobs this last month, 90% of those gains in our private sector. And Trump is going after Harvard, by the way. I'll give you more details on that later. In our next hour, my guest will be J.C. Corcoran about his Saturday show, J.C.'s Wayback Machine. But first, dealing with forces trying to destroy America. Retired Colonel Steve Bucci. Lock and load. Ready on the right.
You are listening to Larry Connors, USA.
In all these years that Wellington Environmental has been my sponsor, I've never mentioned their duct cleaning services. Allergy season is here, and Wellington crews clean air ducts daily in homes and commercial buildings, also cleaning air handling units and diffusers in commercial facilities. Why? Well, because people will see black dirt and mold on the vents, or they are actually suffering from allergies. Don't be fooled by low-cost duct cleaning providers saying they charge only per vent, because once they get on site, the price will skyrocket. Wellington does not do this, never has. Wellington will give you an estimate, and you say Larry Connors, and immediately you get a 20% discount. Call Cindy, 314-644-4930, 314-644-4930. Make your home and business better, safer with Wellington. Be well with Wellington. Ackerman Toyota is #1 in sales for 2024. That is 2 years in a row. It's really no surprise. Ackerman has the largest customer lounge where you can relax, take your time choosing new or premium pre-owned. Ackerman at Hampton and 44. AckermanToyota.com. Thank you for making Ackerman Toyota #1 2 years in a row. AckermanToyota.com. Ackerman Toyota for life. John Bill Roofing reminds you we are in the stormy season, and that means if you have even the smallest leak in your roof, you could soon have a much bigger issue. Call the John Bill to make sure that your biggest investment is protected. That call can save you major dollars. If you do get hit during a storm, John Bill has a rapid response team. Call 1-800-NEW-ROOF. 1-800-NEW-ROOF. 1-800-NEW-ROOF, John Bill. The Oak Street Inn and Lounge has some great news. The restaurant, Speakeasy, and Sunset Patio will now be open on Sundays starting at 2. Great for those of you in the industry who only get Sundays off. Plus, you get a discount. Enjoy sushi, cocktails, a cigar, the view from the Oak Street Inn and Lounge at Cotterville. What more could you want? Check it out, oakstreetinandlounge.com. Oak Street Inn and Lounge, Facebook.
This is News Talk STL.
In the rain on the Poncha train, underneath the Louisiana moon. I don't mind the strain of a hurricane. They come around every June. The high black water, a devil's daughter. She's hard, she's cold, and she's mean. But nobody taught her it takes a lot of water to wash away New Orleans.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
Welcome back. We've got a guest I often love having on. Haven't had him for a while, but I'm glad to welcome him back. 30 years Special Forces serving our country. Now with the Heritage Foundation, retired Colonel Steve Bucci. Colonel, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. And
it is always my pleasure, Larry.
Yeah, you know, whenever I get a chance to get you, I grab it. And so I thought, look, maybe I can get you today. I know you're moving into a weekend, but we got you. Thank you. Let's begin with, first of all, the assessment to help us understand. And I know you don't want to deal on the political side, but understand the mechanics and the things that are involved with the decision yesterday to replace the National Security Advisor, Walls, and now Rubio is temporarily also taking care of that, and put Walls as a UN ambassador. And supposedly it all centered around the Signal Gate issue. Your thoughts?
Well, it appears that Mike Waltz's tendency to want to send text to everybody was enough of a distraction that President Trump said, look, this guy's still good. He's still smart. He's still capable, but it's becoming a distraction with him here in the operational oversight role that the National Security Advisor plays. So it's time to move him. We needed to fill the UN ambassadorship anyway with somebody really good. So he moved him there because of the loss of at least Stefaniak to keep the numbers correct there at the House. Now, Marco Rubio has been doing a great job as the Secretary of State, and I'm sure he can handle the job, but that's a lot of work for one person to do both those jobs. So I'm hoping they'll come up with a really good name for someone to be the permanent National Security Advisor once Waltz moves out. But this was housekeeping within the White House.
Do you not find it ironic, almost laughable, that you began by saying, well, Walls apparently liked to text too much and Trump didn't want him to do that, when Trump was the one who was firing these all the time?
Yeah, but it's different firing them all the time than it is doing it in the middle of the National Security Council meetings, and this is something we're going to have to deal with. I was discussing this earlier today. We have a culture now that is different. I remember working with Secretary Rumsfeld when he found out that if somebody sent him an email unbidden, and even if he didn't open it, that if he in a court, they would make the assumption that because it had gone into his inbox, he had read it. And he said, well, I can't have that. People could send me stuff, and if I don't read it, and they're going to hold me accountable to it. So he said, take the machine out of the office. So the only electronic devices he had in his office were his classified phones that, had buttons to the president and the vice president, et cetera, and a video teleconferencing computer that only went to the president and vice president, period. Everything else went by old school means, or other people got it and carried it in hard copy. We don't have that culture anymore.
And you're talking about
These guys
former defense
have to do it.
Yeah, you're talking about former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. Now we got Pete Hegseth in. He's outlined and thanked the president for getting us back to a warrior mode, pushing for the troops to be make sure they are physically active and they are capable of performing their duties, and acknowledging that in some of the athletic standards, fitness standards, they're going to raise them and you need to meet it. But, yeah, there will be men as well as some women that cannot maybe perform some of the physical attributes. They will not be put in an engaged line or on a combat line if avoidable. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, there are standards outlined in the military that, you have to periodically take tests. You have to do these things, particularly if you're in units aimed at combat. You have to meet those standards, and the standards are higher for the combat units than they are for the, non-combat units. But we've got to maintain that. When they're saying that 60% of American youth could not come into the military, even if they wanted to right now, because they don't meet the height and weight standards. They're obese. That's a problem, and that's something we need to work away from and towards more fitness, not just in the military, but in our culture, but for sure in the military, because, it isn't like some science fiction movie where you're just sitting there pushing buttons. You still got to move across the ground carrying weight and under great stress. If you can't do that physically, you're not going to help us in the on-the-ground realm of national security.
I'll have to admit that I could not perform as I did as a young Marine. I'm sure with 30 years Special Forces, you still can, right?
I'm not as good as I used to be. I can still do some
but
stuff.
You're as good once as you ever were. I know that song. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Like the song. I mean, I look at my sons now, and they're in their 40s, and there are things that now I call and say, hey, can you guys come over and help me do this? Which is sort of a code word for, can you guys come over and do this?
Yeah, I hear that. So let's talk about the issue with our adversary of China and Russia as to how their strengths and buildup is, particularly China. They continue to escalate their military activity in just the fact of building and increasing numbers.
Yeah, China in particular, it continues to expand its military. They have a darn near, unlimited manpower base. Right. So, having bodies is not really the problem, but they continue to build, high value platforms, ships, aircraft, missile capabilities. Now, fortunately, right now, their stuff is not quite up to, our levels of performance. Their ships can go. They don't really have a global navy yet. Their stuff really can't sail around the world and fight a war at the other end of it, nor can they supply globally the way we can. Actually, nobody can the way we do. But in their region, within their coastline and ground, they're pretty formidable because there's a lot of them. And it's, in that point, mass has a quality of its own. But I don't want people to think, this is not the Cold War. We go, oh my goodness, the Soviet Union, their guys are all 10 feet tall. They eat glass. They do all this stuff. We know now that probably that was false then. It's definitely false now with regard to Russia. The Russian military has shown itself to be, other than having nuclear weapons, they are essentially like a third world country.
No, that's quite an assessment.
Can't do logistics. They don't do command and control. Everybody below the rank of pretty senior officers are just followers. They don't have the kind of initiative that you see in our military. But if we let ours diminish anymore, in size and in, the ability to replenish and refit our platforms. Like we have a new M1 tank out that's apparently like scarily spectacular in its capabilities, and the M1 tank was already pretty darn capable compared to other countries' tanks. Anyway, now it's
let me
much better.
raise a question on that, though. I mean, you're talking about a ground type war, and it's good to have that. But I mean, do you see us being involved in a ground war, as opposed to not even pilots but drones taking part?
Drones are more and more going to be an aspect of war. Cyber is more than it's ever been before going to be an aspect of war. But as we found there in Ukraine and in other places, in many situations, it comes down to men on the ground, or in some cases even women on the ground, doing the hard lifting of fighting on the ground. Those things augment them, but we are not anywhere close to the era where we just send nothing but drones or, avatars out there in the cyber world to fight. We're still going to be having human beings shooting one another, at, in some cases, scarily close proximity for the foreseeable future. That is not going away yet. Anybody who, they like to write novels and stuff about this, but we're not there yet.
All right.
Those other things are going to, they're adding to warfare. They have not yet changed the face of warfare the way some futurists would like to think.
Retired Colonel Steve Bucci, 30 years Special Forces with the Heritage Foundation. And again, sir, thank you for your time. God bless.
God bless you, Larry. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Coming up, I want you to hear how the U.S. Navy responded to Houthi drone attacks on the Harry S. Truman carrier group. And another warning about Sharia law, maybe in the U.S.
You can connect with Larry on Twitter at Larry Connors USA.
I've got a phone number for you and a website where you can take a free, quick survey to learn how to use artificial intelligence, AI, to put your company on a fast track to the future. Here's the number. It's a 636 area code, 636-689-0545. 689-0545. This is PRI Global. And recently, the St. Louis Business Journal named PRI Global as a leading IT consulting company. 25 years working with hundreds of companies, several Fortune 500, locally and around the world. PRI Global has its own AI lab to develop what's best for your company. Take the free survey and be on your way to the future. 636-689-0545. 689-0545. Or go direct PRIGlobal.ai. PRIGlobal.ai. You want the best place to watch baseball or any sport and be able to enjoy premium cigars and whiskeys? Lit Cigar Lounge. Lit has so many events each month. You need to constantly check the Lit Cigar Lounge Facebook. You don't want to miss anything. Plus, you can order food from Napoli Brothers Pizza and Pasta, delivered within minutes right to your table. By the way, we're in the season for great patio dining. Napoli Brothers Pizza and Pasta has your table waiting. I have several questions for you, but there's only one answer. Who has the most 5-star reviews for windows in St. Louis? Renewal by Anderson. Who is the Post-Dispatch Window Retailer of the Year? Renewal by Anderson. Who is the J.D. Power Award winner 5 years in a row? The same. Renewal by Anderson. Dial pound 250 and say Windows. Pound 250, say Windows. Renewal by Anderson. A better way to a better window. Hey, if you're 50 or older, you do not want to take any risk with your money. In fact, you want Leslie Consulting. My friend Bob Leslie can show you a gain and retain plan. It means that you never lose. Plus, you get up to a 20% bonus on day one. Leslie Consulting, a leader in brokerage and risk management. 314-721-0066. LeslieConsulting.com.
This is News Talk STL.
I'm chasing tail lights straight as a crow flies, hunting just a standard country road. I've got a shotgun, it's riding shotgun, and we're both fixing to unload. Son, I know what you've done. There's only one way to outrun me. You better pray your tank don't beat mine to eat.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
At 3:43 a.m. local time, deep inside Yemen, a Houthi mobile firing unit launched two Samad 3 drones into the sky. Unlike the Temu builds of years past, these drones are much better engineered for range, stealth, and surprise, and they are heading straight for the aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman. After launching them, the first one banked hard to the northeast and climbed 18,000 feet to conduct a high dive strike. The other drone went a very different route. In a maneuver called sea skimming, this second drone flew just 10 feet above the water's surface at a speed of about 250 kilometers an hour. This meant the Truman Strike Group had roughly 30 minutes to respond. However, while this might seem like a long time, both drones have features enabled that aim to defeat the Navy's ability to take them out. The first to spot the incoming threats wasn't the Truman itself, but one of her escorts. 20 miles off the port bow, the USS Gravely was on picket duty when the quiet, boring atmosphere of the mid-watch was suddenly interrupted. There, on her radar scope, were the clear outlines of two fast-moving contacts. Practically instantly, the ship and crew meshed together in perfect harmony to come up with a firing solution to save the Truman.
Now, that is a pretty fascinating story, and keep in mind, this is one of our ships, the Harry S. Truman, and we also have another one in the Red Sea area. And we have carrier, when a carrier goes out, it has a group of destroyers and protectors around it. The Houthi rebels have been trying to dominate and control the Red Sea. We're talking about a distance of about 1,400 miles that links parts of the Indian Ocean. And in the process of doing that, linking the Indian Ocean between Africa and Asia, there are various spots along there where they could target cargo vessels going through. The Red Sea serves basically as a Suez Canal does for us. It serves as a Suez Canal for that region of the world. It goes between Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Sudan, and then, of course, Yemen. And in Yemen, there's a Gulf of Aden. And it's a tight turn in that area for ships up and down navigating the Red Sea, entering or leaving that area. And that's often where the Houthi rebels have been trying to target ships. But they can go beyond that. It's just that it makes a good pass opportunity for them. Now, on the same day that that carrier was under attack, and as you were hearing it described as how they were fighting it, picking it up, seeing the drones coming, the radar capability on board, they say, can find a golf ball 100 miles away. That's pretty precise. But the golf ball is just sitting there. Now, you get something moving at you, you need to pick it up quickly and react quickly. And in one of the moves that took place, we now know, apparently dealing with that exact day of that description of what was taking place, as the USS Harry S. Truman made a hard turn, thinking it might need to do that to avoid the Houthi missile, just in case it came through, because there were two, one coming in at a high altitude, then going to drop down onto the deck, the other one skimming across the ocean, basically. But they made a hard turn, and there's an open bay door for the elevator that lifts planes from the lower section up to the flight line. I'm sure they're still trying to find out exactly how it was not more secured, but that hard turn the carrier made, we lost a jet, an FA-18 Super Hornet jet, $60 million. The sailor was apparently in the cockpit, but he was able to jump out before it went overboard. That is good. But this is to remind you, our men and women on duty in the Red Sea with the Navy, they're in harm's way every day now. Don't think that was just regular maneuvers underway. No, it's not. And in fact, even in training, men and women serving our military in training, they're always possibly in harm's way, sometimes more direct. And in this case, if you're going up and down the Red Sea, the Houthi rebels are going to try to target you. So let's pick up the story again about how we countered the attack.
The first shot came from the USS Gravely. At 03:45 on the dot, the ship's Mark 41 vertical launch cells opened up and released 2 SM-2 missiles toward the Samad 3 drones. With the speed of Mach 3.5, these missiles were fast enough to cover 5 miles every 7 seconds. As the first missile arced upward, its nose pointed toward the drone cruising at altitude, trying to come in for a high dive strike. Aided by real-time uplinks from the fire control system, the missile made microscopic course corrections as it closed in. Then, at just over 16,000 feet in altitude, it sensed it was close enough. The proximity fuse tripped 15 meters from the target, triggering the missile's airburst fragmentation warhead. Over 3,000 tungsten cubes punctured the airframe in a focus cone. As the first hostile drone disintegrated into pieces, the second missile had a more complex trajectory. The low-flying Samad was hugging the ocean surface, trying to stay hidden in the radar shadows, but Spy held its lock. As the SM-2 streaked toward it, the drone suddenly banked to avoid being hit, but it was too late. The SM-2 suddenly dropped altitude and detonated just ahead of the Samad's nose cone. Metal fragments shredded the airframe, and what remained cartwheeled into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves.
So they don't need to have a direct hit on it, but to be close enough that when they detonate, they take out the target. It's similar to the Iron Dome, I should say, over Israel. But this is a moving target coming at you, and you're responding at the same time. And you're firing from a moving vessel, and you're controlling it from a moving vessel. The Houthis on land are trying to get their drone in as tight as they can. But let me remind you again, as we were discussing earlier, the Houthi rebels have all of this capability because the Joe Biden administration relaxed the embargo against Iran, and during that term of the Biden administration, they once again began collecting billions of dollars for their oil. And they put a lot of it right back into terrorist activities and their proxy agents, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Up till recently, you didn't know much about the Houthi rebels, but they all began to realize, hey, here's a good target point for us to go after those using the Red Sea. Even though it's 1,400 miles or so long, the depth ranges, and it's only about 220 miles wide at the widest point. The average depth is around 1,600 feet, but in some areas, it gets down to basically less than 50 feet. And in some general areas, 40% of it may only be 60 to 80 feet deep. So the boats traversing the Red Sea had to be very precise of what they're doing. That's the merchant ships and certainly our U.S. Navy ships. Keep them in your prayers, because these kinds of attacks, as you heard described in that report, are a constant threat. There is no casual, oh, we're just out for a day at the sea. No, you're not. You relax one bit, you're going to lose some of our military, sailors in particular, and anyone else on board. I told you yesterday a story about a Muslim man in Canada being interviewed. And he was insisting that by 2060, Canada would be under Sharia law. Sharia law. You look across the face of Europe, and I often encourage you to do that. I've been doing this for years. Say, watch what is happening in Europe once they began to allow migration. Chancellor Merkel of Germany basically told everyone, come on in, we're welcoming you. And they overran Germany. And then she began to realize that was a mistake. And France was allowing a lot in. And so were other European nations. And they're all trying to back off now. And they are reinforcing their borders. The UK was part of it. And they've shut down. They're not going to take in any more illegals. And what they're finding is that some of these get into their neighborhoods, and they begin to populate it, take it over. And as the man in Canada was saying, we are having babies. You people aren't. So we will outpopulate you. According to a Pew report he was referring to, in Canada, we should have enough Muslims to basically rule the nation of Canada. And we will probably use Sharia law. Not every Muslim and Muslim nation practices Sharia law. There are parts of the Mideast where women are allowed to drive cars, where they're allowed to walk around without their faces covered, without wearing burqas. They're allowed to talk to men. But in the Sharia law land, a woman can just be grabbed, thrown to the ground, and stoned on one man's word that he saw her defile herself or Muhammad. Now I want you to hear from a Texan who says, I'm watching what's happening around us, and I'm worried that they're trying to bring Sharia into our states and in Texas.
The White House, the current administration, President Trump, J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, y'all need to get down to Texas. Something's happening down in Texas where they, along with the Epic City that the Muslim Brotherhood it was trying to pass in Texas, they're doing protests and different things down in Texas, and they're trying to pass Sharia law down in Texas. We're not having that. We Americans. This is SAFO country. We're not having this Sharia law in the United States of America. We will not have Sharia law up in this country. You're not marrying those 6-year-olds. You're not going around raping and beating and torturing women, especially Christian women. We're not playing that up in America. We're not playing the Sharia law up in the United States. Tom Holland, I need all of y'all down in Texas because they started it in Texas. They're going to try it next in my state, and they're going to spread this crap around the whole United States. We're not playing the Sharia law crap in the United States.
By God, I hope she's right. We're going to make sure we shut it down. With this administration, I fully expect that. What do you think would happen under a continuing Biden-type administration? Scary, isn't it? And real. Well, tomorrow is a big, big day. Big day for you? I mean, have you got any money you want to spend and wager? More on that story when we continue.
You are listening to Larry Connors, USA.
The Napoli heritage of fine dining continues with Napoli Kirkwood. Napoli Kirkwood, now open. So add that to Cafe Napoli in Clayton, Napoli 2 in Town and Country, Napoli 3 in St. Charles, right next door to Napoli C. And don't forget about Napoli Brothers Pizza and Pasta in the district, Chesterfield Valley. All of those locations, plus now, open, Napoli Kirkwood.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
And there's your call to post for the Kentucky Derby. This will be the 151st Kentucky Derby. The race, 1 1/4 miles long. They were going to have 20 horses in the field, but one has been scratched, apparently has a bruise on the hoof. It is one colt trained by the legendary trainer, Bob Baffert. Now, Baffert got suspended a while back. He is a Hall of Fame trainer, but he's back at Churchill Downs for the first time since Medina Spirit won the victory in 2021, but then got stripped because of a positive drug test. Baffert says it was a mistake. We weren't trying to put the horse on steroids. It was in the ointment we used to treat the horse. Now, that was his story. They gave him a 3-year suspension, and now he's back for the first time. He will be having a horse in the race. And one of the horses, I'm trying to find out which one is going to be his. I think it's going to be Rodriguez. No, they scratched Rodriguez, which was the Wood Memorial winner. Rich Strike has been a last-minute addition to the field due to the scratches as of previous times. So you could get a late horse added that maybe ends up winning. When Mystic Dan came in third in the Arkansas Derby last year to punch his ticket to get to the Churchill Downs, Win Placer show, the money placed on that kind of bet, $2.4 million. So there could be some big payouts if you pick the right horse. All of them have to be 3 years old, and none of them have raced that distance of 1.25 miles yet. 100,000 plus expected at Churchill Downs. And then, of course, you got the national, global, worldwide audience. Coming up in our next hour, J.C. Corcoran will join me. Remember our pledge, one nation under God.
You can hear podcasts of this program at Larry Connors USA Facebook. Larry Connors USA Facebook.
John Bill Roofing reminds you we are in the stormy season. And that means if you have even the smallest leak in your roof, you could soon have a much bigger issue. Call the John Bill to make sure that your biggest investment is protected. That call can save you major dollars. If you do get hit during a storm, John Bill has a rapid response team. Call 1-800-NEW-ROOF. 1-800-NEW-ROOF. 1-800-NEW-ROOF, John Bill. Great patio season to enjoy any of the Cafe Napoli locations. How about the Napoli Brothers Pizza and Pasta in Chesterfield? Enjoying coal-fired pizza, nothing else like it. Napoli Brothers Pizza and Pasta in Chesterfield. A few doors down, Lit Cigar Lounge, where you can enjoy premium cigars and whiskeys. Check the Lit Cigar Lounge Facebook for details, plus gift cards for friends. I'll see you at Lit Cigar Lounge in Chesterfield. Ackerman Toyota is #1 in sales for 2024. That is 2 years in a row. It's really no surprise. Ackerman has the largest customer lounge where you can relax, take your time choosing new or premium pre-owned. Ackerman at Hampton and 44. AckermanToyota.com. Thank you for making Ackerman Toyota #1 2 years in a row. AckermanToyota.com. Ackerman Toyota for life. It's that time of season when families, businesses are moving. For local or long distance, I endorse McGuire Moving. Get a date set soon before the schedules are booked. 314-241-0600. 241-0600. McGuire is constantly giving back to our veterans, such as Support Dogs for Our Brave. So with McGuire, you're getting excellent service and helping our vets. McGuireMoving.com. So many times, Vincent's Jewelers has helped me surprise someone special. Vincent's locally owned can do the same for you, and you don't have to break the bank to get something really nice, maybe even customized. The smile you're going to get back from that special someone, priceless. Check VincentsJewelers.com every day because new items are arriving and there are special deals. Vincent's, my only jeweler. VincentsJewelers.com. VincentsJewelers.com. I can tell you how to get a free quick quiz to see how artificial intelligence can boost your company's potential. You go to PRIGlobal.ai, PRIGlobal.ai. St. Louis Business Magazine listing PRI as one of the leading IT companies. And PRI has its own AI lab to develop what your business needs. PRIglobal.ai. PRIglobal.ai.
This is News Talk STL.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
China is going to evaluate where it goes next. In fact, if we look at the statement from the government that came at 8 o'clock this morning, the exact phrasing is China is currently evaluating this. The timing of this is very interesting because this statement released during a holiday, a 2-day holiday here in China, that perhaps suggests that it may have something to say. It could have perhaps waited until next week to make this kind of very visible remark. At the same time, let's be clear, China does not want to appear that it's taking orders or actions from the United States. It does not want to be seen as the nation that caves in to the United States. In fact, over the last few days, we have seen a lot of attention on social media, a lot of propaganda, very pro-nationalist themes by the Chinese government, saying that it will not kneel down. Another phrase we've heard is that bullies are paper tigers. It wants to stand defiant, and it is sending a message, especially to people here in China, that it's here for the long game. Nonetheless, this is a bit of a break from this stalemate that we have seen.
Basically, China blinked. China blinked. They don't want to acknowledge that. They want to continue to tell their populace we're not going to bend the knee to the U.S., but they are making some changes. And now they're discussing that, well, maybe we can talk and work things out. It's not just a matter of the tariff wars, trade wars, but how China has been stealing U.S. technology for decades, and we have no recourse. They don't have any courts you can go to. We have a patent in this country. They don't care about a patent. They'll duplicate things as they choose, put them back out on the market under a different name. Who can stop them? Kevin O'Leary has talked about that previously. We'll go over that in more detail as we move forward. Thanks for joining us for hour number 2, Larry Connors USA, on this Friday. Here we are, May 2nd, 2025, and reminding you with Larry Connors USA, you're going to get news, opinion, analysis, and education. You will leave each hour with more information than you had when we began. And let me remind you again, we have an excellent app, the NewsTalk STL app. I'm out the other day at one of my clients, the Oak Street Inn and Lounge, as a matter of fact, in Cottleville. And somebody says, well, I really like the station, but I have a hard time getting it even on the radio signal sometimes out here. I said, we have 2 great FM radio signals. They do a good job covering the area, but sometimes due to atmospheric conditions or the growth of leaves during the summer, things of that nature, it might not be as effective. I said, you need to do what I do. Get the app, NewsTalk STL app, absolutely free, download it. And in fact, if you have one already, you simply need to upgrade it because we've added a lot of new features. But you have that, and then you, in my case, I just play it through the Bluetooth speaker in my phone. I don't actually use the radio signal. I'm not knocking our signals. I'm just saying there's your option. My daughter in Florida listens routinely using the app. I had a friend the other day say he was over in Europe and listening to the program. You can do that from anywhere. Get the app and use it. So when I showed these guys the app, they quickly downloaded it on their phone and pushing one button, boom, they were listening to what was on the program at that time. Later in this hour, we're going to be joined by J.C. Corcoran. He's joined News Talk STL with a special program that airs on Saturday nights from 6 to 9. JC's Wayback Machine. Well, obviously, we're going to be talking about some history, but also some of the great stories and interviews he's done over his decades as a, what are you still calling him, a shock jock? And we'll ask him that a little bit later in this program. J.C. Corcoran. Now, back to the issue of dealing with China. And, of course, the leftist media, the way they continue to point out, they want to ignore everything that could make America look good. There's a report that China has lost 5 to 10 million jobs. May I repeat that? 5 to 10 million jobs since Trump started pushing the tariff. Companies closing early, realizing they're not going to be able to keep things up. They're not going to have a market. They're sending people home, maybe bringing some back on a part-time basis. But 5 to 10 million jobs. And just yesterday, while everybody's complaining and saying, oh, we're going to be hurt, we're going to be suffering. Well, our jobs report came out for last month, 177,000 new jobs added to our economy. 177,000, and some of them involved trucking. 90% of them were in the private sector. Now, under the Biden administration, if you had 177,000 jobs added, you're looking at probably 90% government jobs, DEI program hires, things of that nature. No, these are businesses hiring because they see the horizon coming and they want to be part of it. Don't want to be left behind. And right now, there are still, I know several of my clients have mentioned Oak Street, Cafe Napoli locations, all of their locations, Lit Cigar Lounge. A lot of them have trouble getting folks that would be serving you at a restaurant or things of that nature. There's still jobs there, and they're paying well. Some people just don't want to work. They want to live on the government teat. Ours, again, I saw the other day at one of the stops off of an interstate, a guy sitting on the curb, and he stood up and started walking down the line of cars. I would guess maybe he was late 40s. Maybe I'm off. But he was certainly capable of sitting on the curb, standing up on his own, walking up down the line as if he needed money, and then going back. And just across the street was a supermarket with a sign, "We're hiring." He had to see it. But he didn't want to do a real job. He counts on you giving him money. Now, there are some folks physically can't do a job. This guy could have. Mentally, possibly. Drug issues. Who knows? But there are too many people out there that just want to count on you and your generosity. And I'm all about being generous and helping other people, but not until they exhaust everything they have available that God gave them. But again, looking at the coverage from the leftist media, CNN headline today making a point. Labor market, reference at 177,000 jobs, I said, makes a solid gain despite the swirling uncertainty. My God, they cannot do a single headline, cannot do the story without saying, oh, but there's fear-mongering and rumoring, and everybody's worried what's going to happen next. Why don't you take what's in front of you and acknowledge it? They can't do that. Trump is calling on the Federal Reserve to lower the interest rates. He cited lower gasoline and grocery prices, strong employment numbers, that 177,000 jobs. I think I said 176. I was off 1,000. He states gasoline just broke $1.98 a gallon, lowest in years. I have not seen it that low. Maybe you have. But he made a statement with that. He said groceries and eggs are down, energy is down, mortgage rates are down, that's a fact, unemployment's strong, and much more good news, billions of dollars coming in from the tariffs. He added, just like I said, we're only in a transition stage, just getting started. Consumers have been waiting for years for pricing to come down. No inflation, the Fed should lower its rate. Now, I don't want the Fed controlled by the executive branch and following what the president says. But looking at the numbers, he's right. They lowered it with less positive news when Biden was running, or whoever was running for him, in November going into the election. They made a point to lower the rates in October. Just coinky-dinky timing. There is no such thing as a coincidence with the leftists. And then dealing with China, now that they blink, Secretary of State Rubio.
Look, this is hurting the Chinese economy. People forget that the factories where all these shoes and shirts and clothing and all that stuff that comes from China, those are all Chinese jobs. When they say that the containers at the factories are not going to be sending things to America, that means they're out of a job. This is hurting the Chinese economy badly. I think there's two questions. Can we reach some sort of short-term accommodation with them? That's what they want. I mean, the Chinese are reaching out. They want to meet. They want to talk. We've got people involved in that. Obviously, our Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is involved in those efforts, and their talks will come up soon. But I think there's a broader question, and that is whether we should, this is a wake-up call that we truly need to become a country that can make more things in America and not be as dependent on China.
And that would be good. That would be good for our nation. Our top imports from China, based on food and merchandise, last year, we got $56 billion worth of cell phones and household goods, $34 billion in computers, $30 billion in toy, games, and sporting goods, $26 billion in electrical appliances. Those jobs are evaporating for a lot of the Chinese companies. Yes, you can own a company and a business in China. Of course, you're going to have to adhere to the party line, and they may want to come in and take it over, just nationalize it on the spot. But these Chinese people rely on these jobs, and they're not shipping exports out. There's going to be a hurt point. Kevin O'Leary.
There's a pattern, though, Maria, that with China you should be aware of, particularly innovation in America. When a product or service is actually created here and people spend hundreds of millions in R&D, when it hits a $5 million run rate, it gets knocked off. I testified at the Senate a few weeks ago. I used an example of a very simple product called DrainWig, which is an innovation in America to help hotel owners reduce plumbing costs by catching hair in drains. It's so simple, but it's a patented product.
Right.
40 knockoffs. 40 knockoffs.
Right.
Put the company out of business.
Out of business. And they cannot retaliate against China. They can't sue because China does not have courts for them to participate in. You can issue a suit here, but it means nothing. Now, if a local U.S. company did the same thing, oh, yeah, they would be in a lawsuit. So it's not just the trade dollars. It's the fair trade and the trade regulations and restrictions, and the fact that they're stealing from us. And Senator Ted Cruz points out something else. Aside from China, look at what the Biden administration did to help Iran get stronger, and now Trump is stepping in and saying, we're shutting that down.
Iran's oil sales fell from 1 million barrels a day down to 300,000 barrels a day. And the price of oil didn't move at all. Right. It had essentially no impact on the global price of oil. When Joe Biden came into office, he inherited an Iranian regime. The economy was in free fall. The regime was teetering. And when he came into office, they were selling 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Biden immediately stopped enforcing the oil sanctions, and the Iranian oil sales skyrocketed from 300,000 barrels a day to about 2 million barrels a day. And as you rightly noted, in a very real sense, the Biden administration, by refusing to enforce sanctions, flowed $100 billion to the Ayatollah and in a very direct way funded October 7th and Hamas and Hezbollah by providing the principal source of revenue to the regime. So President Trump is exactly right, going back and saying we're going back to maximum pressure. We're going to cut off the money and we're going to cut off the funds that are funding the terrorists.
Great. That is great. And the Trump administration is doing much more for Americans than Joe Biden on other levels, including keeping illegals from getting federal funding for housing intended for you, but ends up leaving Americans on the street.
Also, you alluded to securing the border, and such a great job has been done with all of our partners at the table. And at HUD, we want to make sure that the resources that we have now, which is American taxpayer dollars, in the Biden administration, they prioritize illegal aliens over the American people. And so we signed an MOU with Secretary Noem at DHS to make sure that HUD-funded housing only goes to American citizens and no longer will it go to illegal aliens coming across our border. We have about 9 million people living in subsidized housing in our country. 59% of illegal alien families use some sort of welfare program, costing us $42 billion a year. And so we have prioritized American and American people only to live in HUD-funded housing.
As it should be, and that is our HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, saying it's going to be for Americans, not illegals. President Trump yesterday was speaking at the University of Alabama commencement, and he made it clear where he stands on protecting women's sports.
And as long as I'm president, we will always protect women's sports. Men will not play in women's sports. No way. As you graduate, it's natural to reflect on 4 years of happy memories, and you've really had happy memories here. You've done a lot of winning. Winning is a good thing to do. But today I'm also asking you to look forward to really something very, very bright and more promising, and it's going to be an even more promising tomorrow, I promise you that. You're the first graduating class of the golden age of America. We're in the golden age. You watch. It's the golden age.
That's an excellent point. And making it clear that we're going to protect women. Just yesterday, as I reported to you, the Football League in England and in Ireland said no transgenders will play against women in football. Not going to happen. Now, tomorrow is the running of the Kentucky Derby, the 151st. It is 3-year-olds, mostly male. There are females that can enter. They will let them run against the male horses. They will not let the male horses run against the fillies in a race designated for them. Why? Because they know the biological differences. 3 fillies have won the Kentucky Derby at one point. Regret, 1915. Genuine Risk, 1980. Winning Colors, 1988. Their names etched in history. They were rare exceptions and brilliant. 3 out of 151 years. Because generally you don't want to put a filly into the Kentucky Derby. Not a good idea. So we got a special program for you on News Talk STL, JC's Wayback Machine, that airs Saturday. JC's coming up to discuss it. Lock and load, ready on the right.
You are listening to Larry Connors, USA.
I want to tell you more about Wellington Environmental's dustless blasting services. Wellington can blast paint, grease, graffiti, even stripes off parking lots. Truly amazing and powerful. But can Wellington blast something more sensitive? Yes, Wellington can use dry ice to blast soot and odors off smoke-damaged surfaces right after a fire. Currently, Wellington uses dry ice to clean mold off wood inside a home. Why? Well, dry ice immediately disappears, turns into a vapor. That means no mess to clean up, no damaged surfaces. You need to check with Wellington, always researching and practicing with new, better, faster, safer equipment and products for you. And it's very easy to schedule an estimator for your next project. Call Cindy, 314-644-4930, 644-4930. Be well with Wellington. McGuire Moving is Silver certified, which means they are great at relocating senior citizens. In fact, McGuire is a household name because McGuire understands the stress involved when moving older adults. So if you or family members need help moving, I highly recommend McGuire Moving, 314-241-0600. 241-0600. Get a free in-home estimate. McGuireMoving.com. I've got a great evening planned for you. We start with dining at the Oak Street Inn and Lounge in Colorville. Spend some time on the rooftop. Go down to the Speakeasy, which is now open on Sundays at 2. And just one visit, you're going to see why I'm always talking about the Oak Street Inn and Lounge. You might want to plan a staycation, a romantic getaway, or one for the family. Check the Oak Street Inn and Lounge Facebook for various events this summer. Oak Street Inn and Lounge, Cottleville.
This is News Talk STL.
I'm gonna run away to the gun carry, make camp where the land is bare. I'm gonna run away to the gun carry, ain't no one gonna find me there. Ain't no one gonna find me there. Found trouble in the town I come from, left 6 months ago or so. I had to run from the man I wronged there.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
Welcome back, and I've got a special guest for you who has now joined News Talk STL. His program runs.
Who?
You. Who would that be? That would be you.
Oh, me.
J.C. Corcoran. The Wayback Machine airs 6 to 9 on Saturdays. J.C., good to hear from you again.
It's a pleasure being heard.
Well, you know what? This is that's why you say every time somebody say, good to see you, say, good to be seen. Well, I'm not being seen, unless you're watching on the Rumble, which you can. We encourage it.
Right.
Which, by the way, this is the second operation you and I worked at together. One was at Channel 4 when you were doing movie clip reports and things of that nature. And now.
Entertainment stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So here we are. First of all, how did this come to be that you became part of the News Talk STL family?
Well, I've been trying to get this show on the air for a couple of years, and I was actually in discussions with a couple of other stations, and they foolishly ended up having to pass on it. And these guys we're all working for. I knew these guys. They were across the hall from me when I was at K-Hits for 8 years, doing the morning showgram over there. So I know these guys. And when I told them what I was thinking about, they're like, well, we're thinking about doing something like that too. So, it's important to note that this is not me just sitting there playing records. This is a whole thing that we're doing because there's a heavy dose of pop culture and history and news reports and old commercials and all sorts of stuff from the 90s, the 80s, and 70s that are sprinkled, interspersed, if you will, throughout the entire show. So in addition to all this music, there's also a lot of content, I guess you would say, and they dug the idea because, there is, some references to news and things like that. And so they said, let's go ahead and give it a go. And last week, we kicked it off, and it went off without a hitch, and so they didn't fire me, so I'm back tomorrow night.
I caught part of it. I couldn't catch all of it, and, of course, brought to you by George Weber Underwriting. You're talking about our two owners. Folks, we are locally owned. George Soros has his hand on KMOX Radio and 97.1 because he has shares in those companies now. We are locally owned. We don't have a corporate boss, and the two guys you're talking about are Joe Rush, one of our owners, and Jeff Allen. And both of them great guys. It's a great loose atmosphere. It's perfect for you. It's perfect for us.
Well, when I was doing the K-Hits morning show all those years, I was much more to the left of where I am now.
No kidding.
But we always
no kidding.
But we always we always got along.
Right.
We always got along. And so at parties and stuff, people would say, you spend all your time talking to the guys from the other side. I'm like, yeah, because I find the discussion fascinating, and I still do. So even though I have absolutely nothing to do with the talk programming that the rest of you guys are doing, it still all works out. It still fits.
But you're telling me your personal politics actually have adjusted. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. There's no. I told you on the phone last week. I will always believe that Donald Trump is a con man. But what good are the Democrats if they can't win, and if they can't put things on the table that the American people are, frankly, not sick and tired of? I could go into a whole diatribe about this.
Oh, yeah, you got a program for it.
Well, yeah. Our show on Saturday nights has absolutely none of that stuff. Maybe it's just like a little sorbet and a little something to clear the palate.
Yeah.
And it's all music and it's all news and flashbacks to the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and it's fun stuff like that. So for 3 hours, I made this analogy with the other guys last week. If you go to a Cardinal game, the people sitting around you, you're enjoying the game and you have absolutely no idea who those people voted for. You're all getting along and everybody's cheering and having a good time. And maybe you get to know somebody a little bit. And that's what this show is about, too. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's just got to do with our love of music. And in this case, the music is rock and pop from that 30-year period, the 90s, 80s, and 70s. But we steer away from the hits. We're not playing songs that were hit songs. Like if you talk about the Police, every radio station in town plays Every Breath You Take. But they probably don't play Canary in a Coal Mine. They probably don't play Message in a Bottle anymore.
Yeah.
The Rolling Stones all have great songs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all of this great music out there that, because you brought it up earlier, so I will reiterate here, the corporate guys program these stations from 1,500 miles away.
Right.
And it's like, here's your 300 songs. You get to play these over and over and over again. And that's it. And we don't do that because we don't have to. So we sort of pick up with the songs that were outside of that framework, that very, very limited framework. And so you'll probably hear some songs that you're like, oh my God, I haven't heard that song on the radio in I don't know how long.
Well, let me move into something else. And history is history. Would you say at one point you were a so-called shock jock and you reveled in it?
No. I have been adamant about that. I never did shock radio. The people who called it shock radio were people in local media who didn't understand the meaning of the term. If you actually heard shock radio, which was being done at various places around the country, put it this way: nobody in our business, in the broadcasting business, would ever have categorized what I did as shock radio.
But yet you were at the edge for a lot of them, and yet they liked the edginess, but you stayed, you think, in the lane you wanted.
Well, I think that just because somebody is shocked by something you say or that you do, doesn't make it shock radio. Shock radio was a whole genre of stuff. It's a whole menu of things that all the guys who were doing it did, and we didn't engage in any of that stuff. We just didn't do it.
Well, look at how the basic audience has changed anyway. And, of course, when you were originally on radio in the beginning and I was in TV, selections were very narrow. I mean, you had 3 major TV stations in town, maybe a 4th, but the cable options were not out. The radio listening audience was not as big. You didn't have iPhones you could listen on in any other way. I mean, your competition has just exploded around you, but they're not really competing unless they can meet you at the point of where the listener wants to be.
Well, let me just say something. I'm sitting right here in my car talking to you right now, and I have satellite radio. Satellite radio is the same stuff that you're getting on over-the-air radio. You're just getting it without commercials.
Right.
That, to me, is no bargain. That, to me, is no value. We're steering away from all of that on Saturday nights from 6 until 9 o'clock. And you will hear songs that you know and that you love, but that you're sitting there scratching your head going, well, I wonder why St. Louis radio doesn't play these songs that JC is playing.
And it's not just that, JC. It's the stories you bring to the table and the interviews you've done.
Me, I archive the crap out of everything. I always have, radio and television. There was a time, Larry, when I had 9 VCRs. And they were all running. They were always running. And so a lot of that stuff that I recorded in, maybe Deanne Lane doing a newscast back in 1986, you'll occasionally hear a little clip of something if it has some context for the show. So there's lots of little surprises in there. And but all that stuff that I was doing back then, archiving all that stuff, I wasn't even really sure at the time that I knew why I was doing it, but it all played out okay because we're using it now.
You were originally creating the original internet. Once it goes on there, it stays there.
The internet at my house.
Now, I can tell your enthusiasm and excitement for it, and I did not get to listen to the entire 3 hours the other day. but I did enjoy it. What was the highlight for you?
Oh, just getting that first one on. I have a lot of passion about this show, and I've been trying to get it on the air, like I said, for a couple of years, and it's finally on, and I think just it was like, wow, it's on, we're rolling, and so I just took it that way.
And the other part of it being, and I want to give credit to Scott Weber and Weber Chevrolet underwriting it for you, because this means full 3 hours. And Jeff had shared with me, he said, I told JC, I don't care if you play only 3 songs an hour, just entertain. And I think you can do that.
Well, we do a little segment with Skip Weber every week. It's in the third hour. It's at about 8:20 every Saturday evening. And, the thing about Skip is, yeah, he's trying to sell cars and everything. But I'm telling you, if you ever spend 15 minutes talking to Skip, you will find him to be the most intelligent, smart, well-rounded. The guy, a newsman that I interviewed back when I was like in second or third grade. It was a guy in Chicago by the name of John Drury. And what he said to me is, you got to know a lot of things about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that is the definition of Skip Weber. I know a lot of people who know a little bit about everything, but Skip just seems to know a lot about everything. Have him on the air sometime and have him tell you the story about how he was programming software for spy satellites in Russia.
No, I do that. I'll do that. Listen, we're running out of time, and I don't want to cut you off.
Okay.
That's
right.
But Saturday, 6 o'clock, right here. Saturday, JC's Wayback Machine.
Talk to you then.
Thank you, sir. And your point, the point JC was making about knowledge, yeah, I'm kind of like, I know a little bit of this, a lot of it. My knowledge is maybe 40 miles wide, but only a quarter inch deep in some areas. But it suffices. JC's Wayback Machine, Saturdays at 6. Our third hour coming up here.
You can connect with Larry on Twitter at Larry Connors USA.
Question: are you looking to unlock the full potential of artificial intelligence for your business? I want you to meet my friends at PRI Global, named by the St. Louis Business Journal as a leading IT consulting firm. 25 years helping local and worldwide companies. PRI Global has a free survey to determine where your company stands in your AI journey. You simply go to priglobal.ai. priglobal.ai. And I also have a phone number, so get ready to copy that number. And I'll remind you that PRI Global has its own AI lab, creating, adapting, developing, pushing the boundaries for what AI can do for you. Here's the number, 636-689-0545. 636-689-0545. Or visit priglobal.ai. priglobal.ai. Here's great news. Napoli Kirkwood is now open. So that means fine dining right in the heart of Kirkwood. So you have the original Cafe Napoli in downtown Clayton, Napoli 2, Town and Country, Napoli 3 on the streets of St. Charles, right next door to Napoli C, plus Napoli Brothers Pasta and Pizza in the Chesterfield Valley. All of those locations, and now adding Napoli Kirkwood. What a great place to dine. Napoli Kirkwood, now open. Renewal by Anderson is having a huge sale. Buy one, get one 50% off. Renewal has the most 5-star reviews in St. Louis. Is the Post-Dispatch Window Retailer of the Year, winning the J.D. Power Award 5 years in a row, plus the nation's best warranty. For a limited time, buy one, get one 50% off. Details at rbastl.com. rbastl.com. Renewal by Anderson. You've worked hard for your money, so protect it. Meet my friend Bob Leslie and ask about the Gain and Retain Plan. Leslie Consulting, 40 years in the St. Louis area as a leader in brokerage and risk management. Call 314-721-0066, 721-0066. Oh, and ask Bob how he was the LA Dodger #1 pick. LeslieConsulting.com.
This is News Talk STL.
There's 1,000 miles in 18 hours. I got a double drive down southbound 35. I got the hammer down, Detroit made 525, pushing my ass right down that line. And that smell of burning diesel fuel just tells me that I'm back out on the road.
This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.
Usually when you think about a Trump voter, you think about a white male with a red hat on, but there were millions of black voters who picked Donald Trump this time. So I came here to talk to 3 of them, and I was surprised by what I found. You weren't always a Republican.
No. Actually, I come from a family that was like super Democratic. My first time voting, I voted Democrat. I voted for Joe Biden.
What about Trump appealed to you?
Am I allowed to cuss?
Yeah, you can go.
I mean, part of it is he's an asshole. I like authenticity.
You voted for Obama then you voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, but 2020 you voted for Donald Trump. What made the change?
I began listening to someone, her name is Candace Owens, and I read her book, and it just opened my eyes to maybe he's not this person that I have been led to believe that he was.
Those are black voters thinking for themselves. It was kind of funny in the first response, the young man said, am I allowed to say why I like him? And he said, yeah. Van Jones of CNN conducting the interview said, yeah, go ahead. He was worried that, will I be cut off? I'll be blanked out. You won't let my answer appear on the air? He said, no, tell us. His answer was pretty stark. He called up Trump. He said, I think he is an A, H. He said, but he's authentic, and I like that. There are probably many others that agree. Others, as you were hearing the other woman point out, that I just began to look around and see what he was doing compared to what I'm told he was doing. You know, to that extent, right now, there's still another push underway by the leftists. They're going to continue every step they can. CNN is pushing this story now. The government under President Trump is bending the arc of U.S. history in a new direction, away from the civil rights focus of the past 60-plus years. Addressing or even acknowledging racial injustice toward people of color is out. Separating church and state is out. Exposing anti-Christian bias and being anti-woke is in. Then they talk about the Department of Justice Division creating the landmark 1957 Civil Rights Act to defend Americans' rights with a new mission. But what Trump is basically telling through his administration, that mission is now filled with anti-Christian bias, yes, anti-Semitism, yes, woke ideology. That's exactly right. A majority of the lawyers at the Civil Rights Division, people who got jobs there to secure equal access to the ballot box, are expected to resign with pay come September because Trump thinks we should basically make sure you can prove you're a U.S. citizen to vote in a federal election. Even golfer Phil Mickelson got onto that soapbox the other day when Chuck Schumer was standing there and saying, the Save the Vote Act that Trump wants will not take place. We're not going to do it. It's dead on arrival. And Phil Mickelson said, you're a traitor, calling Schumer a traitor. And who complains the loudest about votes not being done right? That would be the left generally, unless they won something. And if you disagree, well, then you're an election denier. But how many times have we heard from Hillary, Stacey Abrams, and other Democrats when they lose, that wasn't fair? They're election deniers. Van Jones continued his interview talking to young black voters as to why now Trump.
So you voted against Trump in 2016.
Yes.
But then in 2020 you voted for him?
Absolutely.
Why?
I saw how things were going during his first term, and I was pleasantly surprised, and I was pleased with what was happening. I saw the economy getting better. I saw country relations in certain countries getting better.
You know, people, when they think about a Trump voter, they usually think about like a white dude with like a red hat on and a pickup truck, and y'all are not that at all. So Donald Trump's team went in, they took down Harriet Tubman's picture for a quick minute. They're trying to like knock out the black museums. What does that have to do with the price of eggs, and how does that impact you?
In some ways, it's a slap in the face. In other ways, I don't care. I care more about how I'm going to take care of my children.
I don't think the average American cares about that. I know I am sick and tired of seeing black people sit there and complain about something, but not taking action and steps to actually try to change things in an appropriate manner.
In an appropriate way. That does not mean torching Teslas, shooting into Tesla dealerships, shooting people driving Teslas. And that war is not against Trump, really. Not even Musk. It's just what they represent. We have got to get back to a stable base. Some will say, well, Trump is never going to be stable. You're entitled to your opinion. But stable base also includes how we're teaching our kids. And I've yet to have someone stand in front of me and tell me why they think it's perfectly reasonable and a good idea for an adult to teach a 3-year-old about sex. Why? Why would you want to do that? And then you get to the institutions of higher learning, and they still do the same stuff. Now, granted, at that level, they're not a 3-year-old, but they might have the mind of a 3-year-old, the pablum they've been fed through education, wherever they were getting it. Harvard University was, of course, basically pushing DEI and was not going to relinquish and back off of DEI when Trump announced, if you don't do it, we're cutting $2 billion in grants and contracts. Now, Harvard has an endowment of $50 billion. They have enough to give every student $7,000, but they want that $2 billion from the government. They want to dip into the endowment. And they can also still raise tuition rates anyway. They were not going to. They were not going to bend the knee to Trump, basically stating hands off higher education. This week, just this week, Harvard renamed its Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office in a change that nods to President Trump's effort to eliminate DEI. And, of course, we expected them to try to rename and get around DEI. But the bottom line is the Ivy League University, and this is from CNN, also said it would no longer host or fund any affinity group celebrations during commencement May 29th. And again, that decision came after the Department of Education threatened funding cuts if you don't cancel graduation celebrations that separate students by race. They were doing that. They were having graduation day only for blacks, or only for whites, or only for Asians. You're not going to bring our nation, our world together with that kind of separation. Those kids schooled and roomed together for the most part, except for those universities that wanted to have separate dorms. Now, in the past, separate dorms, men and women. I grew up during that era. And to get into the women's dorm, you couldn't. You had to go through a reception area, and you had to sign out when she came down to leave with you and sign her back in. Now they have mixed dorms, supposedly different levels, supposedly no access from the other floor. But hey, college students will figure a way if they need to. So Harvard thought we're doing good. We're stepping up and we're going to turn our back on DEI. Then you have Harvard faculty, students, and other supporters gathering on the lawn outside the chapel in Harvard Yard voicing support of the school, stating, "Patriots stand up to tyrants, hands off higher education." One student, a sophomore, said, "Now more than ever, we need to have each other's back." Well, that student, judging by his name, Abdullah Shahid Syed, may be a U.S. citizen, or he might be here on a visa. He might not be here next year. White House advisor Stephen Miller stepped and ripped into the legacy media yesterday and their view of ethical journalism.
Most of your papers never covered her story when it happened. To the extent that you covered it at all, it was because President Trump forced you to cover it by highlighting it repeatedly over and over again. He had to shame you into covering it. And each and every one of you that sides over and over again with these MS-13 terrorists, to the extent that you have the financial means to do so, you all choose to live in condos or homes or houses as far away from these kinds of gangbangers as you possibly can. If I offered any one of you a rent-free home with no taxes to pay in any of these gang neighborhoods, and I said your neighbors are MS-13 terrorists or Mexican mafia or Sinaloa cartel or Tren de Aragua, I couldn't pay you to live there. But yet you, with your coverage, are trying to force innocent Americans to have these people as their neighbors, and that one day their daughter may be abducted from their home and raped and murdered. So you're not going to get an ounce of sympathy from this administration or President Trump for the terrorists who've invaded our homes and our country.
And you know what? We've got members on the left saying it's wrong to call this an invasion. What the hell else would you call it? It has been an invasion. And he was speaking specifically about the Maryland man, as they refer to. He was not a citizen. He was an illegal. Had been in the country and deported twice before, then recently got caught in a car with several others. It apparently was human trafficking. But then he got deported when they sweep, and his wife had already filed charges against him. She needed a temporary restraining order. She has since resurfaced, pointing out that, yes, in a recording in 2020 in a court hearing, she said, he hit me around like 3 in the morning and just wake up and start hitting me. She said, at one point I tried to escape this very guy that the Maryland senator went down to rescue as one of his citizens without due process being deported. This woman was not getting due process in her own home. She saw a neighbor walking their dog and screamed, "Help!" And she said, this guy, again, Abrego Garcia, the same one that's down there in El Salvador now, grabbed me from my hair and slapped me. The neighbor was stunned, didn't know what to do. She goes on to allege that she tried to get an order in December, but her father or his family convinced her not to because his father was sick. She said later, I was afraid of being too close to him. I have multiple photos of violence he could be and the bruises, all of this written in her handwriting. But it is common with spousal abuse when it comes to actually pressing charges. Many times women don't. And they may file for a restraining order and then ask it to be released. And sometimes it leads to their death. White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt talking about this same guy that Stephen Miller was saying, you guys would not even cover it until you got shamed into covering what he really was. And he's right. Carolyn Leavitt said, the Maryland man hoax continues to get worse for the fake news, as we always said it would. Just imagine if we had more real journalists in this country who actually cared about digging for facts instead of pushing fabricated narratives to advance their political agenda. And shame on the Democrats for continuing to advocate for this illegal criminal, MS-13 gang member, and wife beater. That's exactly what he is. This is no Prince Charming. This is not even a guy that could be nice occasionally, apparently. He's an MS-13 member. This is the stuff they were ignoring. Now it's actually printed in CNN. Stephen Miller is right. He said, you had to be shamed into doing your job properly and getting details out. But they want to continue to parrot lies, as Trump's saying, there are good people on both sides, suggesting he was endorsing the neo-Nazis, whose streets, our streets in Charlottesville, when he never did. That was over the battle of a statue coming down, remember? There were good people on both sides saying, we think it should stay. Others saying, no, it should go. But they were not the ones bringing weapons and banging and fighting each other. And I remember in Chicago, in South Chicago, they were taking down a statue. I can't recall if it's Washington or Columbus, to be quite honest. And they asked one of the residents, a black man, said, what do you think about taking down that statue? And he said it very clearly, directly. That statue's never harmed me, hasn't done a thing to me, has no relevance to my life. That's what many Americans are waking up and realizing. Wiping our nation's history doesn't make it go away, you're just hiding it. The Civil War is a stain upon our nation. Be aware of it. Know it. As always, Larry Connors USA. News, analysis, opinion, and education. And remember our pledge. One nation under God.
You can follow Larry on Larry Connors USA Facebook. Larry Connors USA Facebook. This is Larry Connors USA. Larry Connors USA.